If you're heading off to Disney and don't know where to start, click yourself over to MiceChat and you're out of the dark. They take the dizzy out of Disney for you and for me. So come on, it's MiceChat, that's where it's at.
Hello, everybody. I am Dusty Sage here in the MiceChat podcast newsroom because we have some huge news for us today. And we are joined, as always, by Chloe, who
Hi,
is out in Orlando. Hi, Chloe. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I am amazing because today was the most unexpected and incredible of days. And it was just a couple of weeks ago that we were, excited and caught off guard by the sudden announcement of the reopening of Disneyland at the end of
Yeah.
April. And
Yes.
so everybody's been thinking that's the big news. All the news that's going to come out between now and the end of April is going to be what are the ticket prices? How can you score a ticket? What's the scheduling of a ticket going to look like? What are the operating hours? Like all the questions have to do with reopening. And today, early o'clock in the morning, we got word that Disneyland Resort was about to approach the city with a massive end to end, like one side of the resort to the other, expansion plan. A complete and total rethink of what the Disneyland Resort is. Crazy, right?
Absolutely crazy. And the timing of it is just interesting. I
It's
this out
bizarre.
of
I
nowhere, I feel
still
like.
can't wrap my head around why now. Like, why not wait until after the resort opens? But why is it happening today, a full month before Disneyland reopens to the public as a theme park? But I
Yeah.
have some thoughts. And before we get into that, I thought maybe we can go through the news a little bit for folks so they know what it is we're talking about. Many folks may not have even seen this news yet. So, first, let's give it a name. This project is called Disneyland Forward, and it's one word. So, Disneyland and then an uppercase F forward is one word. So they like to do weird names for things. At least this one doesn't have a colon and an exclamation point on it as well, like they do with many of their rides. But Disneyland Forward is really, it starts off as just a project to reach out to the city council and get approvals and permits for their ultimate plans. And although we do have concept art that we're going to be sharing right here on this video, uh, there is also an element of surprise to this project because Disney is sort of sharing placeholder images. So things that they might build or might do. They're getting approvals for expansions of shopping and dining and reuse of properties throughout the resort. So let's go through what some of those things may be. And we're going to start on the far eastern side of the resort. And for those of you that know Disneyland, that's the Harbor Boulevard side of the resort. It stretches from the Howard Johnson Anaheim Resort, MiceChat partner hotel on one side of Harbor there, all the way down to where the convention center is. That whole side of the street is what we're going to talk about right now. And the first thing, not that exciting to some of you, but also not a surprise, and that is they're bringing back the idea for that huge parking structure with a pedestrian bridge over Harbor Boulevard. And the general spot that that's located is about where former MiceChat partner hotel, the Carousel, used to be located. Disney purchased the Carousel some years ago and then tore it down with the intention that that would be where a pedestrian bridge would go. And then behind that is a gigantic empty lot, mostly empty lot, that's already been cleared for a huge parking structure, about the size of the current Mickey and Friends structure. So that would allow the resort to expand. They're really going to need those spaces because they can barely manage with the structure and expansion that they have now. But the exciting stuff happens a little bit further south than there. And that's where the current Toy Story parking lot and the old strawberry field lot. For those of you who remember back in the day, there was a family that sold strawberries out of that lot. It was their
Mhm.
farm, and they had a little stand, and Disney bought them out to build what was supposed to be the third park. So way back in the 90s, Disney had started to think about expansion. And then in the early 2000s, they purchased that land and ultimately decided to temporarily put a parking lot on it until they were ready to build a third park. And Chloe, do you think this is where they're going to build a third park?
I sure hope so, personally. That'd be great.
Well, it isn't. They
Oh,
surprised us. So
oh
they
no.
bought that land. They bought that land some years ago, and this is modern technology, folks. Here's my ear pod, not a hearing aid, but my Apple EarPods, so that you can hear what I'm saying. But they bought that land to build a third park, and what they've decided to do is put shopping, dining, and entertainment there because the Anaheim Convention Center is located right there. And so instead of having a tiny theme park in that spot, they're going to have a pretty good sized shopping district that is super well themed. And they want to have a mixed use permit for that spot. So instead of having an area zoned for a hotel and an area zoned for retail and one for entertainment, they want the whole project to be all of those things. So you may see a hotel wrapping around one side. You will see shops and restaurants wrapping around the rest of that whole property, and it's sort of a square. So imagine a square shaped property there with hotels, restaurants, entertainment, possibly even a Broadway style theater, and in the center, a lagoon with all sorts of pathways and trees and beautiful things. So
Sounds very
to,
Disney Springs-esque.
it is. In fact, when they were speaking to me, they talked about Shanghai Disneyland's Disneytown, which
Mm-hmm.
is similar to Disney Springs in Florida. And it's quite a bit smaller than Disney Springs in Florida and a little more linear because it's a square with most of the stuff around the outside, and the center is this lagoon. So it'll be very easy to navigate, sort of
Yeah.
like a world showcase, but without the
Mhm.
international theme. And
Are you
it
saying we're
reminds
gonna
me,
get like a Westcott of some sort?
that's
Finally.
exactly what I was going to say. It reminds me of the early plans for Westcott
Yeah.
and what they originally got approval for way back in the 90s. And
Hmm.
some of these thoughts and ideas have resurfaced in recent weeks. And it's super exciting. But that is not the entire Disney Forward plan. In fact, that is the tiniest piece of it. So if we walk just a little bit further, we're going to cross Harbor Boulevard there. Maybe we'll take that pedestrian bridge, Chloe. Off we go in our dapper outfits across the new pedestrian walkway, and we're now in the esplanade between Disneyland and California Adventure. And this area is probably going to be the one that changes the least. But if you walk a little bit further into downtown Disney, this is where I think we're going to start seeing more changes, where we'll start seeing more mixed use entertainment, retail, dining, shopping, hotel, all merging into one space. And I think we will ultimately see some changes to downtown Disney, particularly on the far west end of downtown Disney, where there's currently that weird space, Chloe, where the ESPN zone and the former Rainforest Cafe and the AMC Theater, and there's an Earl of Sandwich and a Lego store. And it's sort of a weird hodgepodge of things that had closed. They were going to build a hotel there and it got canceled because of a dispute with the city, which we'll get back to in a second. And then they never reopened some of the spaces and they did others. And it's just been sort of a weird, sad spot in downtown Disney for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And they're going to wipe that area clean, it looks like. So everything west of Disneyland Drive, which is the bridge that you cross over in downtown Disney to get to that area that we're talking about, everything in that area will now become part of this new expansion we're about to talk about that is super exciting. So up to this point, Chloe, you have a pretty good idea of what the Disney Forward plan is going to be?
Yes. So far.
Okay, good, because then I know our audience has it too. That this plan is really just it's Disney's attempt to rethink what they offer in spaces that aren't well used. So instead of having a big flat surface lot where the Mickey and Friends or the Toy Story lot is, they can put retail and stuff and green space and water features and have you shopping and dining, and they'll have you park instead in a parking structure somewhere. And I think that space will have a tiny parking structure of its own, but then that big one we talked about on Harbor will be more for people that are going to visit the whole resort. So now here we are on the west side. We've walked all the way through downtown Disney. We've passed through that area that's going to be redeveloped on the west end of downtown Disney. And at the end of that pathway is the Disneyland Hotel, which on the concept art that you're looking at is still there on the property. So the Disneyland Hotel and the Paradise Pier Hotel. So everything on that whole side of Disneyland Drive, from the Paradise Pier Hotel on the far south end of Disneyland Drive there on Catella Street, all the way down to where the Mickey and Friends parking structure is going to become a giant redevelopment zone. And this is super exciting. I'm calling it the West End project because it's taking place on the whole entire west end of the resort, from one end to the other. And they're going to leave the hotels, it appears, but they're going to then fill in all that space in between where the parking lots were and parts of downtown Disney and where some facilities for some of the hotels were. And that's going to become what looks like the third gate. So I'm so stoked about this because, and I'm going to reel myself back in because Disney was very clear that they're not 100% sure what they're going to do with this space. They know some attractions are going to go here, and they've shared some types of attractions that may, and Chloe's going to get very excited here when I mention these. But it could either end up being expansion room for Disneyland and California Adventure, both, or become its own third park. And we think that because it's on the other side of the road from either Disneyland or California Adventure, and that whole side of Disneyland is already got Haunted Mansion, New Orleans Square, Splash Mountain, Critter, all that stuff along the whole backside. It would be very hard for them to punch through and create new lands across the street. California Adventure might be a little easier, but we think what will happen is probably some form of a third gate that also is hotels and so forth. And Chloe, they mentioned things like the new Fantasy Springs at Tokyo Disneyland, which is similar to the Fantasyland Forest in the Magic Kingdom, but more magical because it has a frozen land, a
Yes.
tangled land, and a Peter Pan land, complete with the Skull Rock and the pirate ship and all that stuff that was lost at Disneyland from the earliest days of the park. But they also mentioned like a Zootopia type of an area and a Tron coaster and a Toy Story Playland. Now, that is not the final list of what will go there.
Yeah, that's
Those are
kind of a
examples of
hot list
the
of attractions.
exactly. It's the level of theming they're thinking about. So when they
Mhm.
say a fantasy springs type project from Tokyo Disneyland, they're saying that's the level of commitment. Again, with my ears falling out, so it's fun. Um, so that's their level of commitment for this project. And that excites me because it's not plug and play like some Disneyland lands are, like Adventureland, where the land is minimally themed, but they plug in rides like Indiana Jones and the Treehouse and the Tiki Room and the Jungle Cruise. It's
Mhm.
more than that. It's a completely, totally immersive land. And for example, they mentioned the Snuggly Duckling pub from
Yeah,
Tangled,
that'd be
and they
cool.
mentioned the Frozen ride from Frozen, and then they mentioned being able to be in a hotel and looking down into Neverland while you enjoy dinner, for example. So the combination of having the hotel built into the environment and being themed to the environment, so there'd be shopping, dining, hotel, and theme park all in the same spot. How does
Sounds
this sound to you?
It sounds kind of like Epic Universe that Universal's building here in Orlando, kind of like that one and done stop where there's attractions, resorts, an entertainment complex, kind of like in a concentrated area, if they move forward with that and not just a theme park approach to that space. So it's
You
very
know, I
interesting.
hadn't thought about that, Chloe, and I think you're spot on that
Mhm.
that Epic Universe model where the guest there would be no turnstiles.
Mhm.
The guests would be able to walk through certain areas of that park to get from the front to the back where the hotel is. There'd be sort of like an esplanade area, like that area of downtown Disney we are just talking about where the ESPN zone is now, which bisects this property that we're talking about. So that's sort of in the middle of where this theme park would go, straight towards the Disneyland Hotel. So how do you put a theme park there and still get to the hotel? You just walk right to your hotel. That part's open to guests. But then to
Mhm.
get into some of the theme park areas where the attractions are, you might have to scan a magic band or show a Disneyland app or maybe facial recognition because Disney is testing that now.
Mm-hmm.
So very interesting, but I think this is pretty far off into the future. So
Yeah.
now that we know what's exciting about it, we really do need to mention what the problems are. And you'll recall that we wrote a lot on MiceChat in the last few years about the plans to build that parking structure on the east side of the resort that got canceled,
Mm-hmm.
in part because local hotels were complaining it would cut them out of the resort district in a way that many guests leave Disneyland from the harbor side and walk on that sidewalk and then pop in for dinner or to buy things from their gift shops. And they make a lot of revenue off of that. So if Disney was going to build a parking structure there behind their hotels, but then build this sky bridge over the street, bypassing the sidewalk on Harbor Boulevard, they'd lose out on all that revenue. And that sort of caused the city to backtrack on it. Disney was not willing to be flexible, and that got canceled. And then the same thing happened with a hotel that they wanted to build in downtown Disney, right where the ESPN zone and AMC Theater and all that is. Uh, the reason why those all sit empty right now is Disney was so sure that hotel was going to be approved, they kicked everybody out. And they started working on, how they were going to route guests around the resort and building alternate pathways and things because they were sure they were building that hotel.
Yeah, I
We're
remember.
thrilled that the hotel got canceled and the city council nixed it, in part because they did not want to give Disney tax breaks on the hotel. And Disney wasn't willing to build this four-star hotel without tax breaks. And so once again, Disney said, well, our way or the highway, and they backed out,
Mm-hmm.
leaving this hole in downtown Disney that they've never really truly been able to fully fill. And now we know why, because they had this new plan that they would like to be able to do. So what are the chances that this is going to happen? Do you think it is going, if they couldn't get a parking structure approved and they couldn't get, this hotel approved, how are they going to get an even bigger project approved?
I mean, if they're not looking for tax breaks or any financial assistance, if they're taking this on themselves, that might give them a little bit more leeway in making this happen. As far as all the concept art goes, I think as Disney fans, we've kind of become acclimated to things not exactly turning out the way that the earliest concept art looks to be. So I'm excited for something new, especially if it's using unused space in the Disneyland property. For something new there is always exciting. But I'm not putting all my eggs in the basket quite yet, so to speak. Kind of waiting to see how this all pans out over the next few years.
I think that's smart, Chloe. I mean, you're right that Disney is famous for rolling out ideas and then rolling them back or changing them or canceling them, sometimes without even telling anybody, or doing something completely different. They got plans more or less approved to build Westcott
Mhm.
instead of California Adventure, and then in the end, they decided to roll that way back and build a project that was half as expensive, and that's
Port
the
Disney,
California Adventure we know today. Hmm?
Disney and Long Beach, Port Disney. I'll
That's
never.
right. They were going to build Disney Sea out there where the
Mhm.
Queen Mary is, and that never happened. In fact, that's why we have a California Adventure today, in part. But so Disney does change things. Here's why I think a lot of this will happen, and why I don't think they're going to have as much trouble with this gigantic project as they would have had with those two smaller projects we just talked about, the parking structure and the hotel. And that is, at that time, Disney was riding pretty high on the fact that they were the ones bringing most of the revenue to the city and that they should be able to just ask for what they want and get it approved. So Disney wasn't doing the things they needed to do to get the community involved. They didn't have residents involved. They didn't have the local hotels and community leaders involved. They didn't even have all of the city council involved, just a couple of people that really back them. And they went to the people that they know would support them and said, here's what we want to do. Will you support it in the city council? And those folks said, sure, yeah, you will be able to get that approved for you. And it didn't happen. This time around, Disney is in a completely different position. They don't want any public financing whatsoever. So they're not asking the city for tax breaks. They're not asking for incentives or for the city to build any parking structures. The Mickey and Friends parking structure was built by the city of Anaheim, not Disney. And this time around, Disney will pay for everything. So they're going to pay for some transportation corridor improvements, for the parking structure, and for everything that happens at the resort. And it'll all be paid for out of ticket prices. And I think that is the first and most important thing, because for the city, it means their tax base is going to increase. So the more things Disney sells tickets for, and the more hotel rooms that get booked, the more money the city makes. So, and the city doesn't have to give any of it back to Disney this time around. So I think that's going to be very, very popular with the city. And then the other problem is, what about all those businesses that are around the Disneyland Resort? And Disney has already started reaching out to hotels and partners in the area. And I believe what we're going to see them do is, Disney has very few hotel rooms of its own. And it really does rely on hotels around the resort to help house people when they come to visit. They're called Good Neighbor Hotels if they qualify for the program. And we just saw Disney last week offer new hotel program contracts to Good Neighbor Hotels in the area. So they're already greasing the wheels to make these people happy. And we think what they're going to let these hotels sell tickets to the resort, maybe some access to the parks when the reservations need to be made, all sorts of free marketing and promotions that these hotels will be able to do. So they're really sort of unofficially part of the Disneyland Resort. And so those people will be on board this time, and Disney's not going to build that hotel and everything and the new parking structure in a way that will cut these folks out.
That's
So the
great.
last group of people that Disney needs to reach out to then are the unions and to the residents of Anaheim. And they did commit today to using all unionized labor to build the new project. They're going to use state-of-the-art building techniques that are environmentally friendly to make residents happy and environmentalists. When the site plans have to get approved, they'll be able to show that they're using the friendliest environmental standards for all the new buildings. And they also want to be sensitive to hiring practices for these new jobs, both on the construction side and for the new workers. So they're looking at making sure that they have enough women, minority, gay, and lesbian employees at their resort. So they're thinking about this entire project holistically and what will be best for the community and job development programs, more money for schools, more money for local nonprofits. Disney's really thought of a plan that's not just about the Disneyland Resort, but its impact on Anaheim as a whole and the amount of money it generates for the city, which will be at a higher rate since they're not asking for any of it back in tax breaks. So pretty
That's
good plan. That's why
it's
we think that this time around, it's going to be a little bit different.
Yeah, it's a great response, especially to what happened before with the previous hotel project that was canceled, about shutting down all those businesses. All those people were out of work unnecessarily now.
Mm.
So it's a good turnaround. One question though, how is this even possible with the current climate, what the whole world is still going through? And we Disney World is back open, has been since last summer, but so many projects have been delayed or outright canceled or postponed indefinitely, or what have you. The 50th celebration has clearly been scaled back to what it was originally planned. It's so hard to imagine that all this good stuff is coming to the West Coast when it's not even open yet, and the East Coast is open but not exactly thriving as they hoped it would be for. How is this going to happen?
It's
Do you
a
have any
super
insight?
question, Chloe. And I don't have the exact answer on this, but here's what I think has happened based on some conversations and comments that I've heard from Disney. The
Mhm.
first is the city of Anaheim, having given Disney a little bit of trouble in the past, suddenly went through a full year without any tax revenue from the Disneyland Resort. So for almost an entire year, there was no one visiting. So not just the Disneyland hotels not generating any revenue, but almost every hotel in the city shut down, and
Mhm.
most of the restaurants and almost all of the jobs in the whole city. That the number one employer is Disneyland, number two is the convention center, number three is the sports complex, because we have the Angels out there, and the Ducks, and all of that shut down. And the
Yep.
city, I think, is at a point where they realize that they need Disney. And Disney knows that this is the moment that they can ask for all those things they've been dreaming about doing, that maybe they would normally wait because they've lost so much money in the last year, and
Yeah.
maybe this project will be pushed way out still, but they're asking for this now because they're most likely to get a yes, both from the city and from the residents who are hurting and need jobs. So Disney has taken COVID and they've literally created COVID aid. And as they would say, and this is aid for a city that is suffering from the effects of COVID-19. And this is the tonic that the city needs. And in a way, it's like Disney riding in on a white horse to save Anaheim from, the ravages of a year being closed. And it could take a long time. In fact, they think it's going to take about 2 years to get all the permits they need. So
Mhm.
once they're permitted on an area, let's say that project where the Toy Story parking lot is, they get
Mhm.
permitted there. Then they have to start creating their finalized plan for what they're going to do, submit that to the city, then that needs permits. So each thing that you do there needs to be permitted. And there's so much involved in that process. Folks have to approve every plan, wiring, sewage, access and egress from the property, fire safety. Like there's a million things that have to get approved, and then they have to hire contractors and they have to start building it out. And so there could be some back and forth at that point. Some people telling them, oh, well, you can't do that, but you could do this instead. And it might take them some years of planning after that. So I think this is a project that's somewhere between 7 and 10 years away from us seeing all of it, but we are going to see pieces of it starting to come together. And there are pieces that we still don't even know. I personally think they will tear down and rebuild the hotels on the west side. You can see the actual hotels, the Paradise Pier and the Disneyland Hotel, still in the plan that they just released today. So those hotels show exactly as they are now. But I think that that's just a placeholder because the thoughts of tearing down hotels, whatever, they haven't designed those hotels. They don't even know what they want yet. So just leave them there. They know they're going to want approximately that many hotel rooms or maybe even more. But if they redesigned that, they could build the hotel along the back side of the whole property as a sort of berm
Mhm.
and then have better use of space in the middle for attractions. So we think there will be some stuff that gets rebuilt, some stuff that will be reused, not much. I think in that whole side, there's not a
Yeah.
lot that will get reused. And then there's parking lots between the Disneyland Hotel all the way over to the new parking structure. So there's um, there's a huge opportunity for Disney to do something. And I do think the city and the community and the unions, because they've already started working with them, are behind this project because of Disney's commitment and their new mentality. I've never, in the whole time I've worked with Disney, ever heard them be this interactive with the community, just even inviting us to listen into their plan today. When have they ever invited bloggers to listen in on the plans for what they hope to do? So it's a new style of approach for Disney to work with the community that they hope will support them later on. So they're getting buy-in early in the hopes that we all push the city and residents and everyone else to help get this project approved. It's a really, really exciting time. But back to your original part of that, Chloe, where you said about projects that have been canceled, this is my big concern. My
Mhm.
concern isn't that they will get the approvals they need. My concern is that the economy is not going to return as quickly or robustly as they hope. If it does, then we're probably going to get a very ambitious Disney Forward plan that they'll roll out slowly to us. They'll tell us about little bits and pieces of this as time goes on. It's the gift that keeps giving for Disney PR wise, because every time things go bad, they can just roll out something positive that's coming on Disney Forward and everyone will get excited. But if the economy doesn't return and the tourists don't come back, and they get worried that they're expanding the resort, and that maybe then it'll be soft attendance. Like remember when DCA opened and nobody came, or when Star Wars Land opened and nobody showed up for the first year, they will be cognizant of that and more reluctant. But I think they've learned a lot of things, and I think the very fact that the types of attractions that they mentioned were not Marvel and Star Wars type attractions. They were Disney style attractions. They're
Mhm.
Peter Pan and Tangled and Frozen. They're the things that Disney fans, that people love Disney for. If you're a Disney fan, you don't necessarily love Star Wars or even Marvel. Marvel fan loves Marvel, and a Star Wars fan loves Star Wars, and there is some overlap, but a Disney fan loves Disney. And that's what it sounds like they're really doubling down on and building for this new project. It sounds like they know that.
Mhm.
And I think that's amazing. So I'm hoping that's what comes out of all of this. So wild. And I
Yeah.
still hope you get all those projects out there in Florida, Chloe. I hope that some of that stuff that was
Yeah.
canceled because of COVID, that they're now not going to have in time for the 50th, still happens. We know that the Guardians coaster's coming. We know Tron is still coming. You've got some water show coming out there. Big, beautiful, big, beautiful water show on the
Oh
lagoon at
yeah.
Epcot, I think.
Well, that was actually due to a budget cut because the barges for Harmonious, the new night spectacular at Epcot, those were supposed to be just like the Illuminations globe. It was supposed to come in and out in the evenings for the show only. And part of this wonderful past year of cuts was the pier that they had built for those barges to move in and out, and also cutting back on the money that they would have spent to make the barges move. So now they are permanently parked in the World Showcase Lagoon. And because of the layout of how those need to be plugged in, I guess you could say, they're crooked. Like if you look at the Stargate portal from head on, the main show barge, it doesn't sit center. It doesn't sit centered in the lagoon. Like the American Adventure Pavilion's a little bit to the left, and then it's drives me crazy. So it's very hard to be optimistic about a fountain show when, it literally ruins the World Showcase Lagoon views. Um, it's a different time in Disney parks, as we can see. It's a
Yep.
different when it comes to sight lines, when it comes to theming, when it comes to original versus IP base. It's definitely a different time in theme parks in general. And that's even like what we're talking about with the new Disneyland idea of the third gate. It almost seems like this new approach to how you theme park. Either if they extend it to be DCA or Disneyland or a third gate, it's not going to be directly attached per se. It's going to be a little bit more of a different experience in navigating to get there. And
Hmm.
I don't know. It's just, I mean, my mind's completely open for it. I'm excited for that, and I'm excited for what's to come for Disney World too. But I'm having trouble being optimistic these days,
Oh,
given
I
the
hear you.
cards we've
And
been
and
dealt.
it seems like every time we get excited about something, we get kicked back.
Mhm.
And so there's that reflex in us to be wary about good news. I'm hoping it truly is good no news until we hear otherwise. And of course, we'll always be on top of it here at MiceChat. So you're always going to know, oh my, there's Gremlin right there, folks. That's a little Gremlin.
He's been running
Chloe's
around the
newest.
room.
Chloe's newest baby. So
Yes.
cute. But I think that this time around we're going to be okay. I do think we're going to see projects pick up again fairly quickly. The Disney company knows that there's strong demand. Disney World is absolutely packed right now.
Hmm.
And
Yes, it is.
in fact, they're so busy at Disney World, they can't service all the guests that are there. So they don't have enough hotels, they don't have enough pool capacity,
Resort
they don't
buses.
have enough bus capacity. They're
Yep.
begging people to drive themselves to the parks in the mornings instead of taking a Disney bus.
Hmm.
So Disney World has rebounded maybe a little quicker than they expected because they're not prepared for this. And that's good news. I mean, it's terrible news for the people that are there, but it's very good news for what may be coming in the future. So let's count that as good news. And at Disneyland, they're looking at that and thinking, gosh, if that's happening in Florida, where still there's no foreign tourists, it's all domestic travel and less than that, even just local travel, people from nearby states.
Hmm.
And in California, we have a massive built in local audience, and we've never counted on foreign tourists. We have a little bit of interstate travels. We do still get international travelers, but not in great quantities like
And
they
I
do in Florida.
I really feel like everybody is even more motivated to travel to the places that they wanted to travel because of the last year of being in lockdown. I feel like if somebody wanted to go to Disneyland before or Disney World before, now more than ever, as soon as it's safe to go, they're going to book that trip. So it's going to be interesting.
It is. And we'll keep you on top of that. In fact, our travel partners at Getaway Today, and if you visit micechat.com, you can click the link. It's on every single page of the site. And when you click, it'll take you to Getaway Today, and they'll be happy to assist you with booking Disney World, Disneyland, Disney Cruise Line will be returning late this coming year, maybe November or December, and next year for sure. And Alani, which I visited when it reopened and was a great experience because you're just out there in the middle of nature and not a lot of other people. So if you're looking for safety away from people, you have to be COVID tested before you can even get on the airplane and to go to Hawaii. And then they test you again everywhere you go throughout Hawaii. So it feels much different and very, very safe. And within a month or two, everyone should be vaccinated or have had the opportunity. So I think we are rapidly approaching a point at which things are going to start to feel a little more normal. They, of course, are not going to go straight back to normal, but there's going to be a lot more things open. More and more people are going to feel safe going places because they've been vaccinated or that the people servicing them have. So things are changing. And this plan that Disney has just announced with Disney Forward is another step towards that normalization and thinking towards a future. So instead of Disneyland just thinking we're going to reopen, but we're going to only reopen with 10,000 employees, which they will, instead of 30,000. So only 1/3 of their previous employees. That seems like a budget cut, but Disneyland is letting you know right now they're ramping way up. So in the long run, it's going to be far more than the 30,000 that are going to work there at the resort. So long term looks good. We just need to get through this short term. And Chloe, any other questions, comments before we wrap this one up for folks? Because we'll come back and we'll do a Florida show on everything that's going on out there. And there's other news to cover about Disneyland and the reopening that we haven't even touched on. But what are your thoughts overall?
Overall, I don't have any other questions, but overall, I'm excited for the future because it can only get better from here, right? I feel like we've gone through the worst. Can only get better.
You know, before the shutdowns, before COVID, there were a lot of rumors that Disney World was working on a fifth park project. Universal Studios had announced their new park, Epic Universe, which eventually could have as many as 3 theme parks on it. So they currently have the 2 theme parks and a water park, but they could have as many as 3 more parks in the future. And we thought that Disney might counter that to take some thunder away from them. And then COVID happened and all work on everything stopped. So major projects that weren't well under construction were halted, possibly canceled. So we don't know the status of that big, gorgeous Festival Place Center in the center of Epcot there. We don't know the future of the Mary Poppins ride and some of those kinds of things. But I'm starting to feel like these projects are going to come back in part because Disney's competitors are rushing back with big projects. So not only is Epic Universe coming back, it looks like they've restored the budget because it had been value engineered a little bit way before COVID. So Universal had been, you know, things happen. They come up with a big plan and then they slowly scale it back as they start getting quotes from vendors and things. And that project had been scaled back to the point that some of our crew members had even said they wished it would get canceled so that that land would eventually be used for something a little more ambitious. Well, now what they're looking at doing is very ambitious again. So it seems that everybody is hopeful in the industry, and I hope that sticks. I hope the economy recovers and that all these projects get built the way we hope they will. And that's going to rely in part on the economy and part on you all out there watching, because it's really important when you hear negative things about the theme parks that you not make excuses for the theme parks, but that you say the things that you hope and wish would come. And that's how we're going to end it right now. I'm going to ask Chloe for one thing that she hopes will come to the Disney Forward project. So if there was one ride, land, attraction, restaurant, shop, that something that that would make that project special for you, and this question's coming way out of the blue, what would you want to see at the Disneyland Resort?
If they could make it happen, I would really like to see a third gate. That would be amazing. And specifically, if they're looking to do the Fantasy Springs area, I'm not on the team of duplicating things stateside, but depending on the project, I do like to see things from around the globe for people that can't make it out there. So the Fantasy Springs area looks really, really neat, especially the Neverland. I'm very partial to Neverland and Peter Pan, and that would be great.
Neverland was #1 for me. Just seeing Skull Rock and
Mhm.
that pirate ship, I think whenever
Yeah.
Disney builds a new park, it takes a couple of decades for people to start feeling nostalgic about it. So when Animal Kingdom was new, it was just another zoo with some theme park rides
Not
for
the
me.
zoo.
It was Nahata
Not
Zoo.
the zoo.
Uh, I loved Animal Kingdom. I thought it was beautiful, but it wasn't necessarily an emotional experience for me. Whereas now, when I go to Florida, it's very important for me to go there. It's been there long enough. I'm nostalgic enough about it that I can't go without visiting that park because it was built with so much love and so much attention to detail. So if they build this park with detail, but they bring in some things we used to love, like maybe the Skull Island area with the pirate ship and some cool rides, I think the Fantasy Springs would be the knockout thing that would make Disney fans travel from all over the country and maybe even around the world to visit this new park because it would feel like a little bit of old Disneyland, but with modern technology and modern rides. And would even allow Disney to make some changes. So, it would be taboo for them to ever think about pulling the Peter Pan ride out of Fantasyland at Disneyland. But if they recreated something similar in the new park that was even better, folks might allow them to then maybe do some new things in Fantasyland. Not that I think they'll do that, folks, but I'm just saying that this park gives them the opportunity to fix things that are untouchable now that maybe we'll be able to do later. And would I love to see a Zootopia land? I think that would be amazing. So build us some things like you said, Chloe, that they don't have. Give us a Mystic Point and that incredible ride, Mystic Manor. Give us stuff like that in this new park, and it will beat California Adventure hands down and be the must-see theme park experience in the country when they build it. So think big, Disney. We know you can do it. We've seen you do it in the past, and just keep thinking Tokyo Disney Sea. Tokyo Disney Sea. Think big, Disney. Chloe, thank you so much for joining me. We'll be back with more stuff. Everybody out there, take care.